Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Karen Massey. Karen helps to empower parents and educators so that children find their voice. She specialises in complex speech, including apraxia of speech. Karen is an author, speaker and online trainer. She also leads therapy time, providing face-to-face support locally. And Karen and I are talking about supporting individuals with Down syndrome in your setting. Enjoy the episode. Hi Karen, how are you?
Hi Claire, I'm really good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast today.
No troubles. We're really excited to have you on because we haven't had a podcast episode about this topic, and we're talking about supporting children with Down syndrome and focusing a little bit on communication skills because handily you are a speech and language therapist. Just to start us off though, it'd be good to find out a bit, particularly thinking about your topic. What do you know now that you wish you'd known then?
I wish that I'd known that children with Down syndrome can reach really high levels of skill. So I think when I first started out, I followed along with that really old narrative that, we would expect kind of learning difficulties, and we should expect that perhaps they might reach a point where their kind of skills plateau, and we should just be happy with what we get, and not to push children to achieve too much. And I really wish I'd known that old narrative just doesn't have to be the case.
Well, like, just out of interest, like, not off topic really, but where did that narrative come from? I'm coming from a background, I haven't really worked in the area of working and supporting children with Down syndrome, so I'm just wondering where that narrative kind of has appeared from.
Yeah, I think it's wrapped up in lots of aspects. When things started to be documented about Down syndrome, it's sort of relatively recently, so kind of mid 20th century, and life expectancy even was really not that great. So people with Down syndrome were kind of partitioned into like an institution, let's say, and so they were kind of very much left to it. They didn't access medical care in the same way that we would, certainly didn't access education in the way that we know it. So what people saw was that life expectancy was relatively short, educational attainment was not very good, but not surprisingly, because they weren't offered the education to start with. So it was very much a backwards way of looking at things and kind of saying, well, this is what we can see, so this is what we know. And it's only when people started to challenge those ideas and offer more understanding and help to raise real awareness, and actually help integrate these really valuable people into society and offer them the same opportunities as everybody else, that things started to change. So right down to life expectancy has massively increased as a result.
I mean, I know, because I think when I was prepping for this topic, the first thing that came into my head of my knowledge base, again, not an experienced practitioner, I don't have personal experience of supporting anyone or working with or caring for anyone with Down syndrome. But yeah, my first thought was, I know that life expectancy is a bit lower. And obviously doing the research, I was like, like my first perception is based on the old narrative, and I suppose it is about challenging that and going from that, it's evidence-based theory that you're talking about. I'm wondering how you got into the area of working and supporting individuals with Down syndrome. What's your experience of the topic?
Yeah, so I think when I first started working as a speech therapist, so I qualified in 2007, and about 6 months into my work, I spent some time working in a special school, and this particular special school, there were quite a few children with Down syndrome, and so that was my kind of introduction. And then I moved jobs a couple of times, and then I was in a role where for a couple of days a week I was purely supporting the needs of children with Down syndrome, and this time out in their mainstream schools. And I also went on some training that was run by Symbol UK. So if you don't know about Symbol UK and you're interested in supporting children and young people with Down syndrome in your setting, then they're the kind of go-to organisation. And it was a 4-day training, so I learned masses of information about Down syndrome generally, but also crucially about supporting communication needs. And so as a result, I spent quite a number of years, and I still work with a few children and young people today, supporting their speech and language needs. And so the young people I work with at the moment are out there in their mainstream schools.
Oh, amazing. Because I think you talked about segregation in your introduction earlier, but that integration and inclusion, I'm sure, makes a huge difference for the outcome. And I know we've talked a little bit off air about how speech develops through role modeling and being around, others. So that must be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I guess a little caveat to that, it's not to say that mainstream education is the right fit for all children and all children and young people generally, but those with Down syndrome. I've seen some children and young people really thrive and achieving so much in special education in a way that I don't think they would have accessed and kind of had those same experiences had they gone into their local mainstream provision. But I think it's important that we can start off with those kind of high aspirations, and where it does suit a child's skills and kind of needs to be educated in their mainstream provision along with everybody else, then I think there are lots of positives that come from that.
When we say that everyone can benefit from Team Teach training, we really do mean everyone. Our in-house training puts the emphasis on the unique needs of your setting and creates a consistent approach to behaviour across your entire organisation. Head over to the Team Teach website to find out more. Yeah, because I was thinking, again, whilst planning for the topic, I was just being really mindful with my questions, that when I was thinking of questions, I felt like I was almost being like disrespectful to individuals with Down syndrome by saying, oh, well, so what are the speech and language needs of individuals with Down syndrome? It doesn't work, like nothing works like that, does it? Where, just a diagnosis means everyone's going to be the same.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've heard it on practically every autism training I've been on, that once you know a person with autism, one person with autism, you just can't transfer. And it would be the same with Down syndrome. That said, there is like a recognised profile of speech and language needs that is seen across, I'd say, I'm going to say the majority of people with Down syndrome. So it isn't, of course, it's not all encompassing, but there is a unique profile that does seem to emerge, and roughly speaking, receptive skills, so the ability to kind of understand language and sort of social understanding as well, and kind of understanding what's going on around you, that kind of general level of understanding tends to be higher than the ability to express themselves. So their expressive skills tend to be less developed than their receptive skills. And
that, you may not be able to answer this, but what causes that difference? Am I asking a hard question on a afternoon?
That's a really difficult question.
I know, that sounds crazy. I thought that's really hard, but let's go with it.
So, okay, let's go with it. Let's really think about this. So, so a child with Down syndrome is going to have as much, hopefully as much exposure to language and to experiences as others. And so we kind of learn language, and we kind of build our vocabulary based on our experiences largely. And so that's going to continue developing. We do know that early expressive language tends to start later. So first words tend to be later, and once first words happen, they tend to accumulate at a slower rate than in other children, and partly so in terms of what causes that, so partly they're at much higher risk of hearing difficulties. So having a hearing loss is much more common. Hearing needs and kind of getting to the bottom of them and supporting them can have a big impact. We also see the impact of short-term memory and short-term memory capacity, and often whilst it does affect the ability to process and kind of receptively process language, it does mean that composing longer sentences can be harder. And another factor that would come into this would be physical skills, so the muscles that we need for talking, the muscles that we need for everything. So children with Down syndrome tend to have low muscle tone, which makes forming our words much harder. Sequencing our sound, sequencing our words can be harder. So it could be that they've got low muscle tone and in the muscles themselves, and then that might be compounded by also having an apraxia, which is about the coordination of those muscles and sequencing them as well. So there's kind of a double whammy there, which is sort of double whammy of physical things that might impact. And so speaking can be tiring. And so if they can get away with using, one or two words and getting the message across, much more likely to do so than to go through the effort of composing like a full sentence.
And I suppose if you're struggling with your short-term memory, to actually hold the sentence in your mind and remember what the start of it is going to be really difficult. But I'm also thinking about settings that have individuals with Down syndrome and how behaviours might spill out a little bit, because my limited experience, I know sometimes I've seen individuals that might occasionally self-harm from frustration, it seems, and sometimes what practitioners, not how I would define it, but practitioners might define it as stubbornness and defiance kind of can be quite common. But just I know, again, I'm talking so generally, and I think we have acknowledged that everyone is going to be an individual, but if we can generalize.
So I think in quite kind of early development, because we've covered some of the perhaps potential difficulties and the communication needs and challenges, but if we go over to the strengths, quite often there'll be a real strength in social interaction and social communication, and a real awareness of people. And so what can happen is that real keenness to interact socially, but with a lack of language skills to back that up, you might see children getting into disagreements with other children. So they might come across as quite intense, might lead to kind of physical altercations if they're kind of getting in other children's personal space, just generally wanting to and seeking out that social interaction, but perhaps not picking up on some of the subtle cues, not being able to express themselves verbally. And so other children might find that more challenging. And therefore, you might get some of the kind of physical behaviours occurring as a result. Also, sort of thinking generally about the likelihood that their expressive skills are going to be delayed, that can lead to an incredible amount of frustration So what you might be described as that stubbornness might be around not fully understanding what's being said to them, or it might be around fully understanding but just not having the ability to express and kind of formulate a response, and that can be frustrating when it's kind of day in, day out. So there's a couple of things there, and also something that I think I learned quite a lot about, that was new information to me when I went on the training, was how there's likely to have quite a profile of sensory needs as well in children with Down syndrome. So perhaps if we're not aware of triggers within the environment, so sort of maybe sounds that might be contributing to frustrated behaviour, or low tolerance for things in the environment, that can also be something that we first see, when a child's expressing themselves.
Yeah, so the things that we might see, I just found it really fascinating, really, when you said about the stubbornness, because there is a stereotype, isn't there, with individuals with Down syndrome, or particularly children. I think they're stubborn, they're XYZ and different labels, but it's such a different spin to think of it as that is someone that isn't able to actually formulate and bring a response in that moment. And it must be really tiring, is really what I'm thinking, to process everything all the time. So that's such a compassionate way to look at it for practitioners. I'm conscious of time, and we need to make sure we get our tips in, and also our book recommendation. So what's the book you'd recommend for practitioners on this topic?
Okay, so I wrote a book with this in mind, actually. So it's called Helping Children to Speak Down syndrome through the primary school years. So I do talk from preschool right through to just kind of going into secondary as well. And what I've done with the book is take on background information about Down syndrome, but also tips, not just from me, but from other practitioners who are quite experienced within the field of Down syndrome, and also tips from parents. So I think parents often offer such valuable information. So it's divided into key stages for settings, and within each key stage there's kind of information, there's advice around techniques to support speech, language and communication, and then also some really valuable insight from other clinicians and from parents too.
Brilliant. We'll put that in the notes at the bottom of the episode, because I think that would be super helpful for everyone listening. And then could you just finish with 3 tips?
Yep. So my first tip, working with children with Down syndrome, is don't underestimate the power of familiarity and repetition. So making things predictable and following a set routine can be really comforting for children and sort of older, young people that I've worked with Down syndrome seem to really love the predictable. So lots and lots of repetition. My second tip would be to make things visual. Vast majority of children with Down syndrome are very visual learners. So supporting language and communication with visuals as much as possible, whether it's signing or whether it's picture material, would be my number 2. And number 3, being patient. Things can take a bit more effort and also perseverance, particularly on the part of the child or the young person. But if we can kind of be patient and expect the end result still to happen, I think that takes a lot of the pressure off the journey.
Yeah, it certainly does. And such great tips there. And we've got loads of notes as well to put in the bottom that I think will be really helpful for everyone listening. So thank you, Karen, for your time, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks so much, Claire.